Hey everyone, and welcome back to the 7th Stage Law School Admissions Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Baska, 7th Stage Admissions Consultant. Oh, man, usually I do better on that word than today. Podcaster and blogger. And hey, we're back with part 2 of our Say What episode. So here's our premise. So Clayton Allen, who's also here, is my partner in a weekly AMA live class we do on the 7th Stage website. And Clayton is one of our LSAT tutors at 7th Stage. He is also a real-life law school applicant. In the flesh, in the wild, here he is. And so we cover a lot of questions every week, and we cover a lot of the same questions every week, questions that I've answered for years, and I think this information is just so self-evident. I almost wonder why you're asking this question. But occasionally, Clayton afterwards will go, I had never thought of that before, or to put it a different way, say what? Thus, and so, we recorded the first episode 2 weeks ago. We're following up with this one just to keep going down the topics that we didn't cover last time. So, Clayton, how are you doing today?
Oh, lovely, Jake. And I just want to say thank you very much for having me on. I think that for years I've been told that I have a face for audio work, and that I'm really glad that my talent's been recognized. And
that's why we only brought you on for the video component, my friend.
That's right, for the video component. That's right. And I am glad that my confusion about the admissions process is so excessive that it's taking 2 full episodes. But I am thrilled to be here, and I am hoping to provide what is a valuable resource for the students that are in my position of not really knowing too much about admissions and coming from that kind of angle and perspective, which I think a lot of students are.
Exactly. I prefer to think that we are monetizing your ignorance more than anything.
That's right.
Boom.
I'm paid to be stupid. Yeah. Okay, so business is booming.
Absolutely. So on that note, what do you got for us, Clayton? What do you got?
So I wanted to go briefly over the stuff that we talked about last week and kind of, tee up a little bit the stuff that we have already spoken about. We talked briefly about the LSAT and the LSAT's kind of role in the admissions process and how the admissions officers are thinking about the LSAT and how students should be approaching it as kind of one element of the larger constellation of the app. Mm-hmm. On top of that, we spoke at length about various statements. We talked about the personal statement. We talked about the optional statements. We talked a little bit about the Why School X statement, but that might be worthwhile to harp on a bit more today. We'll see if we have time. And then lastly, we talked about something that is a surprisingly common question we get, which is resume formatting. And what should be on the resume, which is we get a shocking number of questions about that. And it was something that I was a little surprised by. Students were a little surprised by. So we talked about all of that. Anyway, all that is, last week on. As far as stuff that I wanted to talk about this week, I was going to try and go through basically in the same format. Here's a thing that I was confused about or I was surprised by the first time I heard it. And then we can kind of discuss it and sort of think through what that looks like for the average applicant. Do you have anything you want to mention from last week? Any kind of mop up? Anything you forgot to mention? Anything you forgot to talk about? Or you feel like we hit everything on those topics?
See, because that is the thing with a lot of those topics is that because you talk about them and think about them so often, it's all self-evident, right? It's also difficult to remember what are the things that people tend to really latch onto. So I'm good. I'm a blank slate. The past is in the past. I am like a goldfish who has moved on to the bright future.
Okay. Well, like yourself, I often forget things after they happen. And I don't remember the last episode at all. In this goldfish-like analogy, I think I'm goldfish-like in many ways. If you leave me in a large body of salt water, there's no limit to how big I'll grow.
Fun fact. For the Columbia application.
That's right. Yeah. Fun fact about myself, there's no upper boundary to my growth limit. I could be the size of a whale. As far as other stuff that I think would be sort of worthwhile to speak about. The first thing that I wanted to talk about that surprised me in terms of what law schools seem to like and what they seem to consider important in an application. This is resume related. And it has a little more to do with the content of the resume, if that makes sense. Last week, we talked a lot about what goes on there.
Format, yeah.
Right. How it looks, basically. But the big surprise that I had, and I should preface this by saying, I don't come from a family of lawyers. My parents are business people. My dad's an accountant. My mom's project manager. My grandparents were not lawyers. My great-grandparents were coal miners. So there's no lawyers in my family tree.
Yeah.
And to the extent that I knew about applications, really only knew about the undergraduate experience of applications and what it was like to apply on the undergraduate level. And I think that a lot of the parts of the law school app were really confusing for me because they were so novel in that sense. And one of the things that schools at the undergraduate level put a lot of weight on, that schools at the law school level don't seem to put nearly as much weight on, is like, I'm going to use a really broad term here, your like extracurricular involvement. This was surprising to me.
Oh, yeah.
Where
I could see
undergrad schools are like, was he captain of the tennis team or whatever? Like, that's really important for getting into, undergrad. But at the law school level, I mean, the statistics you see on this, the percentages that people give, the kind of back of the envelope, whatever, is like 60% LSAT and GPA or what have you. Like, it doesn't seem like the first primary consideration is what you were doing with your spare time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And the difference here is that, so at the undergrad level, one reason why that's important is because an undergraduate institution really is a broad community, right? So it's an academic entity. There are the dormitories. There are all the student organizations, of which the vast majority of the student organizations are more about leisure interests, things of that nature, as opposed to at a grad school level. It's all about this degree that you're all trying to obtain. And you're not all trying to get the exact same job necessarily, but like in law school, you're all trying to get a JD to become a lawyer, right? And as far as our student organizations go at the law school level, they're almost all professionally oriented. So the Intellectual Property Society, the Federalist Society, the Future Prosecutors of America, things of that nature, as opposed to, and here's our intramural tennis team. You know what I mean? So at the undergrad level, we care about those things partly to get a sense of what may you be involved in here at the law school level. Also, it's a recognition that as a high school student, and I say this as a parent of an eighth grader who's now looking at her possible high school schedule, you're really busy in high school. Your schedule is really busy. On the other hand, you have way more free time than you think you have, and you can still do things like take multiple AP classes and be in student government and be on 2 sports teams and occasionally hang out with friends and all that. You can't really do that at the collegiate level. There aren't enough hours in the day. You have to pick and choose. So as a grad school admissions officer, I'm not expecting to see that. And also I'm expecting to see from your resume the sense of how is this going to lend itself to your professional development and professional outcomes. Ironically, though, one area where I most audibly hear people go, say what, is when I really emphasize to them, but with that said, we do like to see a little interest section at the back half of the bottom of your resume, just to get a sense of what are the things that you find interesting and devote your time to doing, because it gives us at least a little bit of personality in your application. And honestly, it also gives us something to just chit chat with you about when you come to visit and we're trying to kill 5 minutes before the tour begins. And there's only so much we can talk about the weather, as opposed to like, oh, I saw on your resume, like, hey, it says you're really into wobbles crocheting. What's your favorite wobble project that you've done? And you can have an actual conversation about that, as opposed to, so tell me about accounting. What's that like? that tends to be, and with respect to our accountant friends and audience members, noble profession. Perhaps
like I said, my father's an accountant. Yeah. Love those guys.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Perhaps not the most exciting day to day necessarily, but yeah, I'd rather talk about wobbles.
World needs good accountants. But yeah, I do think that's interesting as well, that law schools would, and we talked about this a little bit last week, but that law schools would care about something like that. And I think on the human element, again, it's very easy to forget that it is a human being that's going to read this application rather than some kind of punch card machine, which is what kind of subconsciously many applicants, including myself, are imagining. A very large computer with a bunch of spinning things.
I also think that that's an area where different people want admissions to be like. I do think that, and not to go too deeply into matters, but regarding a lot of the litigation regarding admissions over the last couple of years and a lot of the directives at the behest of the current government, it almost seems like they want more automation in matters. That if you hit certain thresholds academically with your standardized tests, boom, you're in. An inherent problem with that being that then far more people would get in than we have beds in our dorms, seats in our libraries, etc. So there has to be some sort of selection process here. And it also can't all be statistical because stats don't tell someone's entire story.
Mm-hmm. So you do think that interest section can be a deal breaker or rather a tiebreaker for a student with a good or sort of median level statistical profile?
I mean, well, you would be surprised that the amount of things that just randomly you latch onto within the course of evaluating an application. Most of the time, it really is just the core of the application. On the other time, once in a blue moon, you see that someone grew up down the street from your childhood house. You're like, well, isn't that cool? And if we admit this person, I'd love to just mention that to them. Like, what are the odds? You know?
Mm-hmm. Or I'm going to be honest with you, Jake. The odds that someone grew up pretty near to me that's not relatively low.
That happened to me though. So I mean, I grew up. We were a military family, but eventually we settled in rural Vermont, and so the chances of anyone applying from my town to me reading an application from anyone who grew up in this town are zero. But in fact, I read an application from someone who grew up in the even smaller town next door, which was. And she was great. She was fantastic. We were able to admit, and we would have admitted regardless of that tie. So one person does not admit an applicant. But man, I thought, what are the odds? And for another person, I mean, that's a pretty concrete one. But it can be some of those little things that just make you feel a human connection to someone. And yeah, that gives a little bit of spark to their application. It is random. It can't be manufactured because it is those random connections, those random things that connect you to the person reading your application. But it does happen.
Something I was kind of thinking of is like, I mean, you guys on the admissions committee are speaking to one another about the applicants. And surely, as all people do, you're not necessarily always using people's full names. If the guy has like, at the bottom of his resume, he loves hang gliding or something. He's like a real serious interest in hang gliding. You hand that off to your teammate, you're going to be like, here's the hang gliding guy. You know what I mean? Like, does that ever happen? Like, there's something on the resume that sticks out and you're like, oh, that's what I remember about this person. This one sort of very engaging fact.
It can be. And again, is that the reason why they were admitted? No, they were admitted because the core of the application was really strong. But yeah, that something of that nature would make it stand out. Or I mean, a concern that people have repeatedly, what if I have a typo in my application? And yeah, so it may be we're the Notre Dame admissions office, but this is the guy who talked all about why he wanted to go to Georgetown for law school, and we still admitted him, and we're really excited he's here, and we're surprised he's here. But yeah, he's the Georgetown guy.
Georgetown is a great school. Respect to that guy.
It's a fantastic school.
Don't send that one to Notre Dame.
Yeah, but also don't worry that we're not going to throw your application in the trash. Put it that way.
This dovetails quite nicely with kind of the other thing that I thought we might address on this front, which is a question we get a lot in terms of sort of grand strategy for the students and how they're approaching the application process. And that is, I personally lied on all of my applications that I love hang gliding. And that was so that I could stand out as the hang gliding guy because I want to stand out. I want to be a very special applicant. I want people to remember. Is that, do you think, a reasonable approach, this concept of kind of standing out? And in my mind, as somebody applying, I was like, obviously, I want to stand out. I want to be an interesting and engaging applicant and a special applicant. I want to be the hang gliding guy. Right.
But instead, I always tell folks, rather than stand out, you want to make sense. You really want to make sense. That keep in mind that we admissions officers are reading hundreds, thousands of applications in every admission cycle. And so if we stay in this industry for any length of time, we've conservatively read thousands, tens of thousands of applications. And through the course of that, we meet a lot of people. And although everyone is a unique person, obviously, you kind of see the patterns of things, right? Like, it's weird to see someone list surfing on their resume if they don't live by an ocean. You know what I mean? So
a friend of mine I knew in college was a D1 rower who came from Tempe. And the question I asked him, I was like, where were you rowing, man?
Concept 2 rowing machines. Yeah.
That's true. No, he was on a great rowing team in the middle of the desert. And he was like, occasionally we'd get in the car and drive an hour to a reservoir. I was like, that sounds great, man.
But exactly,
I love that guy.
Those are the things that make you go, well, I mean, wait a second, that doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? This also dovetails with, you have to be authentic and organic, okay? Because through doing that, you are going to make sense to the admissions committee. So I think this is also a holdover from the mindset of the undergraduate application, which is a lot of those personal statements or college statements are about you, family experiences, your favorite book, how that informs your life, and things of that nature. And a lot of times the college statements that get publicized are rather dramatic ones from people who've lived dramatic lives. The perception then is, ergo, I have to write something dramatic in order to stand out and be memorable. That's not the case. And certainly not the case for graduate school purposes. We just want to understand, why do you want to do this? And so if you try to stand out, your risk is not making sense anymore, because you're talking about hang gliding on your resume. And I mean, really it'd be the equivalent of like the rowing or surfing thing, because you can hang glide anywhere, I suppose. But like, again, if you're from St. Louis and you're talking about surfing, because you figure like no one does surf law, I will be the person who is at the forefront of this.
Mississippi is pretty big, right?
It doesn't have waves. Yeah, no, it's very big. I would really not recommend surfing.
It's harder to surf there. It's more of a kayaking environment for sure,
with logs going by and
boats,
barges,
shipping containers.
But you get what I mean, right? I would read that and go, so help me understand this. Did you grow up in California or grow up in a surfing area? Do you have time? Like, you got to give me something so that the pieces of the puzzle make sense. So don't inorganically try to zig while you think everyone else is zagging. Related to that also is the reality of, you don't know what everyone else is writing about. So you can only stand out if you could define what the data set looks like. But if you don't know what the data set looks like, this is ultimately an unknown for you. And I also I offer this to people because sometimes people can get really frustrated too with that notion of, how can I stand out? What do I need to do? And if you can't know the data set, if you can't know the unknown, then I'd offer, don't worry about it. You know, because otherwise it's just going to drive you crazy.
And crazy, I have been driven. I think that the feeling of needing to stand out is really a sort of a natural downstream effect of the numbers that people see, right? I mean, they see that whatever school is receiving 10,000 applications this year, and they're only accepting, you know, I don't know, 200 of them or whatever. I'm making up numbers here, but small class, a lot of applicants. This is the truth for a lot of schools. And so they feel that necessarily they have to make themselves stick out in some way. And I think that learning that is not necessarily the best approach was very interesting for me. It informed my application as well. That kind of brings me to talk a little bit about another subject that we get questions on a pretty regular basis, and one that confused me, again, as somebody who really only knew about the undergraduate admissions process. Like I said, I don't know anybody. I mean, I had like friends from college that went to law school and told me about their experience with it, but they never mentioned the idea of an addendum, which is not something you really see at the undergraduate level. Perhaps you do see it, and I just forgot. But I don't remember writing one, and I don't remember.
I think many undergraduate applications don't have that. I think more because the things that typically would happen that would necessitate an addenda aren't as prevalent at the high school level, or are things that your guidance counselors or your teachers can tell us about in those letters of recommendation. So, for example, if someone had significant health issues in high school, which depressed their grades or made them miss school, the applicant could tell us about it, but we also trust that the school is going to tell us about that too, because there is that involvement on an undergraduate application. At the collegiate level, though, and the postgraduate level, there are just so many more opportunities for life to intervene in so many directions, whether that be in college, health issues, family issues. So we're still receiving many applications for people who were in college during the COVID period, spring 2020, fall 2020, spring 2021, where classes were taught live or remote or asynchronous or live. And it's just really hard. Grading systems varied so wildly. It's important for us as admissions officers to give people space to offer that further context. So to that end, there is going to be that opportunity to explain, hey, did something happen that helps us to understand why maybe there's a gap in your resume because you had to move home to take care of a family member, or because you left one job and then it was hard to find another job because of the economic conditions in your area. We want to give you a little bit of space to explain that, just so that way we can understand things a little bit better. Again, life just gets more complicated and messy once you go to college. High school and earlier, it tends to be a little bit, less messy. / we have the guidance counselor and the teachers to let us know about those matters too.
Mm-hmm. And it surprised me when you talked a little bit about sort of where those law school level addenda are typically used. Like when you break that tool out of the box is in situations where sort of something out of the ordinary has happened or something out of the ordinary requires explanation. And one of those things for me personally, you mentioned a long time out of the job market. If there's like a 6-month gap in your resume between two jobs, that's the kind of thing you might want to include an addendum on. I had not put together that might be a reasonable thing. I ended up sending in, I happen to have a gap on my resume, exactly for the reasons you're talking about. And that was something that I explained in my resume, but that I don't know, I wouldn't have known to do that. It wouldn't have occurred to me to explain something like that. It would have just been throw the dice and hope they don't think that I don't even know. Yeah. Whatever the negative interpretation of a 6-month resume gap
and
is.
To that end, also sometimes, more so on the academic side of things, like there's this thought of by drawing attention to something, then you're definitely pointing it out so that we're definitely going to see it. To which I would flip that around and say, again, remember, we're reviewing a lot of applications. We're going to see it. Okay, so in the classic being a semester or a year of grades where that were atypical, weird test history, variations in your LSATs, multiple cancels on your LSATs, the gaps in the resume, non-traditional academic histories. And by non-traditional, I mean gaps in your attendance and education. So went to college for a year and a half, left college, came back 2 years later. Multiple transfers. It's relatively common to see one, but 2 or 3 is a little more atypical. Offering us some explanation for matters just helps us to put those pieces together, and again, helps us to make sense of you. So again, don't stand out, make sense. If you tell us those things make sense. The pieces of the puzzle come together.
Right. It's interesting, this sort of approach and giving students the opportunity to clarify in that way, I think is indicative of the outlook that the admissions officers are using in their viewing of these applications. And that's something I mentioned a little bit last week that I was kind of surprised by, the, I guess, reorienting of my understanding of what an admissions officer is and sort of how they approach these things. Okay. Then I think we can talk a little bit about timing, which is something we also get a lot of questions on. This one is not necessarily as applicable to me because I already sent my applications off, not a while ago, but I've sent them off. They're off my desk. But there are a lot of students who are still in that position of sending off their applications. And there are I would say, surprising number of moving parts related to how you think about sending off an application when perhaps you are taking a January LSAT and your score isn't what you'd like it to be. You're hoping for a score increase. There's sort of just a lot going on there. And I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about, or rather you could talk a little bit about, God knows I don't have much to add, about sort of what that consideration pile looks like and how you want to think about it.
Yeah. And this is one where I think I have recognized the say what aspect of this, meaning I'm continually reminded of a key difference between the undergrad admissions process and law school and other grad programs regarding rolling admission. So at the undergraduate level, for many, it's not even selective institutions, just a lot of different colleges may have one application deadline or like an early action, early decision deadline, and then a regular action, regular decision deadline. And submitting your application at those deadlines is totally fine, because what they're going to do, for, again, a number of colleges, they're going to release decisions perhaps twice a year. One round of decisions right around Christmas time, a little bit before that, and then another round of decisions at the end of March or beginning of April. So whether I read your application in January or in March as a regular decision applicant, you know what? We're not sending out decision letters until the end of March. So we can still adjust our decisions based on where, if we want to report on our current admitted students and find out, oh no, our SAT is low, our GPA, ranking class average is low. We can take some admit offers back because they haven't been made yet, and we can admit other people before we issue decision letters. Rolling admission, on the other hand, which is what almost every law school does, the exception being really Harvard, who holds to a model of having 3 decision days that they publish at the beginning of the admission cycle. There's one in January, there's one in February, there's one in March. Everyone else just starts making offers of admission when they start making them. And then once they do that, they're going to continue doing so on a rolling basis going forward. And so, we're recording this in December. A lot of top schools have already started admitting people, even though their application deadlines aren't until February or March. And so we're coming back to the January LSAT. There may be someone who enters this admissions process blind who goes, oh, I'll take the January LSAT. The application deadline isn't until March 15th. I'm good to go. That's plenty of time. Where on the other hand, we're here to tell them, depending on the school, they may have started admitting people back in October. So strategically, if you're waiting for the January LSAT, it's not the best move. But I also want to clarify this. Just because something isn't the ideal strategic decision doesn't mean it's not what's right for you. Ultimately, you do have to do what you have to do in order to put forth your strongest application. And for some people, that may not be until after the January LSAT and then submitting an application on, I think the January LSAT comes back on the 28th this year. So then you submit all your applications on January 28th or 29th. Is it ideal in a world of rolling admissions? No. Is it what you had to do based on your specific circumstances? And is that okay? Yes, it's what you had to do. But yeah, we get that question all the time. And I do feel bad for the people who realize, oh man, you're meaning if I apply at the deadline, that's actually not great. Like, yeah, but fun fact, in Canada, most of the top Canadian schools, or not most, a good number of the top Canadian schools have earlier application deadlines, and then they do the same thing as like at the undergrad level. So the application deadline may be November 1st, but then whether you apply September 1st, October 15th, October 20th, it doesn't matter because they are not going to start reviewing applications at all until after November 1st. So you're all in the same boat.
Yeah, I mean, this is a sort of a personal curiosity of mine, but why do law schools use a rolling admissions process? What's the justification for that as opposed to a Harvard style? And thank God, shouts out to the Harvard admissions committee. I have a spot circled on my calendar to the extent that I've applied to Harvard, which I don't know that I have. Maybe I have, maybe I haven't on this podcast admit such a thing. But if I have applied to Harvard,
you can set your calendar.
I have set my calendar. It's nice to know, right? It's nice to say, okay, that's the place and that's the time. Why do the rolling admissions? Especially because it seems to disadvantage the school. If you find yourself in a spot where you don't have enough of a certain guy, right? I mean, if you've already over-enrolled a certain type, or you've under-enrolled a certain type, and you find yourself
over-admitted, because enrollment
enrolled is later.
Enrollment doesn't happen until classes start.
Absolutely right. So if you've made admit decisions, I mean, you don't have the opportunity, like they do at the undergrad level, like you were talking about, to kind of tinker with the class to get the exact admission profile you want, and then send that out, right?
Yeah. So So the advantage here is because once you've admitted someone, you can start to recruit them. Okay. And so there is that advantage. Also, this is somewhat a market force thing. Okay. Applicants expect that they will start to hear from certain schools by certain periods. And there is both a market force as well as potentially an arms race aspect of matters here too. So for example, Michigan law historically starts making offers of admission last Wednesday of October, first Wednesday of November. Okay. If I am Notre Dame, if I'm at Notre Dame as their director of admissions, where, I served for a bit of time. I know that. And so if I don't start making decisions until February, there is going to be a chunk of my admitted group who also applied to Michigan, who is also admitted by Michigan, who has been actively recruited by Michigan since November. They have a 4-month head start on me, right? So that's disadvantageous. But you are correct. The flip side of that is you need to be good as an enrollment manager, not as an admissions officer, but as an enrollment manager to keep track of a lot of moving pieces here to ensure that you are not over admitting in certain areas and that you're also keeping track of your applicant pool. This is something that really bit people in the backside circa 2013, 2014, which was a period when national applications went down radically. So in a world of rolling admissions, by the time people figured out, oh no, wait, applications are like falling through the floor, they had already denied admission to a lot of people and waitlisted a lot of people who, in hindsight, they realized, oh no, like we need to admit those waitlists, and oh no, like the denied, they're gone. we can't do anything about that. And so you got to be really careful. And a lot of people learned that lesson. So even in this environment where applications are going up,
it's a bit of a buyer's market these days, right?
But you see that level of deliberation, though, on the part of the admissions officers, that they remember the lessons of that big market correction in the other direction 10 years ago, that it's okay to take your time, be deliberate. And if you're admitting someone, admit the people who you aren't going to regret having admitted down the road, but also acknowledge the zen of it, which is we know typically how the application flow comes in. This is the norm, but it can change depending on the year.
Mm-hmm. And this year, like you said, it is up quite significantly, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I read those newsletters you send out. They're always so heartwarming from my applicant experience. It's unfortunate. There's just not a lot of good news for the
and to that end, too, another big difference at this level is like the application pool can vary so much from one year to the next, where at the undergrad level, it really doesn't. It's pretty stable. But here, like, it's a professional school, and there may be outside forces that increase or decrease applications, typically economic forces. When the economy is good and people are getting jobs, typically applications go down for graduate school. And when the economy isn't so hot, applications go up.
Yeah, I see my application as basically a gamble that the economy will be better in 3 years. And that I'll be able to get a job on the other end with this extra degree, which, I hope I can get a job on the other end. I have a job now I like a lot, but hopefully I can get not that I don't love my job here, but that I'd love to get a different job in 3 years.
It's okay to look at. You should always be looking ahead to the next thing.
Well, I like it here. I like my job. On that subject, sort of the inverse problem, there is the process by which the school chooses the applicant. And then there is the other, and I think more salient for our students and our dear listeners who we love and adore, which is the process by which the applicant chooses the school. And I was sort of wowed by the admittedly less sort of constant discussion of like picking which schools you want to apply to. And the big thing that got me was like this question of how good a school is and like where that sort of comes from and what really distinguishes one school from another. I think for somebody like myself with no involvement in the legal profession. I mean, I've worked jobs that were legal in nature since I was in high school. I was on the mock trial team and so forth. But I wasn't like, I don't have any family members I could talk to about like the difference between one law school and another. And so there's a lot of distinction between two schools that is not readily apparent from the stuff that you might read online, or at least the stuff you might read online in this sort of conveniently located places. There was a resource you pointed me to, the ABA disclosures. And I'll say this to all of our listeners. If you need to kill a subway ride or something, go crack open the ABA disclosures for the schools you're interested in. But basically, schools have to report how many of their students got jobs on the back end, because they are professional schools. And the critical fact that I thought was really surprising that they had to report is they don't just have to report who's getting jobs, they have to report where. Right? They have to report the location and sort of the market metro area
top
spots.
States, the top 3 states for postgraduate employments for that particular class.
Right. And so the the like ranking of a school is the thing that I was familiar with as the metric for like, do you get a job? The other thing is like, well, a lot of people who graduate law school are getting jobs. The rate of job getter is very high. And among those, though, it's not necessarily the case that a school that is like more prestigious or whatever, more highly ranked or more whatever, is necessarily better under all circumstances for getting all jobs. Which I was taught from a young age that the law is an incredibly elitist profession when it comes to getting jobs. That's what I was told. Yeah. I'm not saying it isn't.
Multiple things can be true, though.
Yeah.
So it is. And I think that there is a shorthand for prestige, which are U.S. News ranks and which are, just cultural prestige. And an equivalency here would be that if one of my children told me that they really wanted to go to England to go to college, offhand, I obviously know about Oxford and Cambridge. I know about King's. I know about St. Andrews. These are rather prestigious institutions. That's how I know about them. But for all I know, the University of Exeter may be really well known for these particular programs. In the same way that intuitively, as Americans, we know like, oh, Purdue, engineering, right? Or Johns Hopkins, medicine, and other research sciences. We kind of know those things, okay? So how would I be able to advise my kids on what schools may be good? I probably would start with some sort of rankings or things of that nature. But to this end, what you're getting at is a human element of the law. So again, what simultaneously things to be true. The law can be an elitist profession. Most professions are, okay? However, if you are trying to get a job in a particular market, it benefits you to have gone to have alumni located in that market. So notice how I caught myself, okay? You want an alumni network there because those are the people who are most likely to help you get your jobs. Yes, your law school career center is going to help with that, mostly through facilitating and connecting you with the alumni and directing the recruitment energy of this organization, this group. But here's the key. Where are these people most likely to be? Where your law school is located, because most people start to establish roots. You want to go to a law school located nearby where you live because your family is there, your friends are there, you like where you live. And then you get a job somewhere in the nearby area. Okay, so this is, and this isn't just a logical thing that you can kind of intuit. This is also where the ABA employment outcomes come from. As I'm pointing to the side of my screen, and we'll
where the chat is.
Exactly. Yeah. We'll put a link in there too, into the video, but you can see the hard data too. So for example, if you want to practice in California, attending, it may seem self-evident, like, okay, yeah, Stanford, Berkeley, but UCLA, USC would provide you with more access and opportunities to certainly the LA market, but California more broadly, then probably Penn, then probably Cornell, who historically are schools that are ranked higher than UCLA and USC. And that's because the UCLA, USC Law Alumni Network is based in California for the most part. The flip side of things is if you're the Californian, okay, like you, Clayton, you're from California, but if you want to crack the DC market, you're less likely to have a lot of UCLA, USC, Berkeley law alums located long-term in the DMV area, okay, versus Georgetown, George Washington, George Mason, Maryland, UVA, all the schools that are located in that geographic area. And so what I usually encourage the clients I work with, especially, is to consider, where do you want to be post-grad? And then this is another, say what?
Right.
I think many people in their 20s, especially law applicants right now, are at a stage where they are so desperate to be wanted that their thought is, I'll go anywhere. You admit me, I'll be there. But you don't really mean that. You know what I mean? So there are places where you would prefer to be, and it's okay to want to be in those places and to prioritize those places. So for example, if you want California outcomes, you really should apply to the law schools based in California, maybe also Oregon, Arizona, neighboring states, or at least be cognizant of, if you're looking at another school, what connections do they have to the LA and the San Francisco market? Those are questions that you can certainly ask as an admitted student, but I think it's worthwhile to ask those questions as a prospective student, so that way you're not wasting your time and energy on an application for a school that isn't helping you get to your long-term goal. And to that end, this is kind of hitting the same topic of like, you're so desperate to be wanted that you'll apply to a lot of places. A lot of applicants are so focused on gaining offers of admission that they lose sight of what the actual long-term goal is, which is to be a law student and to be a lawyer in a particular place, in a particular industry, perhaps too. Like, you want to do criminal defense or criminal prosecution or IP. Where are the schools? What are the schools that offer you that kind of programming? I would suggest that most schools have most everything, though. So that's less differentiating than, and I would prefer to be in New York or DC. Cool. Then that's those schools out there are going to have a little bit more oomph. I really run into this mostly with the people who are applying who are T14 or bust, though, where as we are about to work on the Berkeley application, which is labor intensive, lots of questions, lots of unique questions.
Shout out to Cal. Love those guys.
But if you don't want to be in California, why are we doing all these unique statements?
Right. I mean, Berkeley does a good job, I think, of filtering people who want to go to Berkeley, right?
Oh, exactly.
And I think I don't know, it was surprising for me to learn, like I said, I was taught from a very young age that law was like exceptionally elitist, and really the only thing that mattered is the ranking of the school you go to. I know now that is obviously not the case. It does matter. Sure, it's important, right? There are certain firms that prefer
one of
schools,
many,
but
yeah,
it's right. And I moving down here, I currently live in the great city of San Diego, America's finest city. And down here, there's several law schools. The one that I meet like a ton of attorneys from, though, is not like UCLA or UC Irvine. It's the University of San Diego, which wowzers, right? I mean, it's the one on the hill. If you're driving south on the 5, you look to your left, you see it, right? It's right in front of Mission Bay. Beautiful view, lovely like Spanish colonial architecture. But also it's like the law school that people go to in San Diego. I mean, there's several law schools in San Diego, but that's kind of the big one. And a lot of the students that go there end up working around here because they live their whole lives, or they live their professional lives in San Diego. A lot of students that are from the area go to San Diego, USD, and end up here to an extent that, like, if what I wanted in life was to work in the city of San Diego, I would probably have applied to USD to have lived and worked in the city of San Diego. Right. And like, I'm saying this all hypothetically, but like, if that were a thing I was interested in, that would be what I would want to do. If I wanted to work in the Bay, I wouldn't have applied to like U Chicago to work in the Bay, for instance. I would have applied to U Chicago because I really was in love and I would really like to go to the city of Chicago. I would really like to go to the city of Chicago, by the way. It's beautiful up there. I hear very good things. And I think that emphasis is lost on a lot of the students we speak to. And it was certainly lost on me at first. My rule personally for my applications was that I only applied to schools that I would like love to go to, where I was like, I would be like elated to go to this school. Like that was my criterion. But I think that like location being of such primacy, because it is of such importance to the place where you are delivered on the other end, is a consideration that didn't really occur to me. And it really didn't occur to me at the undergraduate level either. I went to the University of California at San Diego because I got in and it seemed like a nice place, and I had like family in the area. It's a great school. No, I loved it. It was a very, very nice, and I really enjoyed my time there. But I wasn't like, oh, well, I am in love with the city of San Diego. The location was it was coincidental that I loved it here, right? I happened to really like SD once I moved down. I've never met anybody who moved to San Diego and didn't like it. But like that location consideration that we give to a lot of students is something that surprised me a lot. Okay. Then once we've talked about the ABA disclosures, the last thing that I thought we could touch on was another kind of grand strategy consideration. And that is, we've talked about when to apply in terms of like what month to apply. But I think the other consideration that a lot of students are thinking about is when to apply in terms of what year to apply. Like which application cycle is appropriate and kind of what considerations go into that. For those of you who know me, dear listeners, dear readers, I took several gap years because I thought that after a couple gap years, I'd be in the right place. And I sort of had to straighten some stuff out in my life before I went off and applied to law school, but like I worked for a little while. I did my LSAT stuff. I work here. Like I selected on a certain basis what year I would want to go to law school, and what cycle I wanted to apply on was a function of when I would be ready. And like, I was wondering if we could talk for a little bit about those considerations and sort of under what circumstances a student should just say, you know, I'm not sending it off this year.
Yeah.
I'm waiting until the next one when I can be the best or the first one on the pile. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think the surprising aspect of that for a lot of people is from an admissions perspective, you can have more time here. A more traditional, we ultimately compare this so much to the undergrad process, because if you're here, you went through the undergrad admissions process, you know, and that process is very traditional. It's very stable. There have been very few shifts to that, and the shifts don't tend to be radical. I mean, like the one right now that we're all still trying to figure out is a lot of schools going test optional, SAT, ACT optional, and then how does that factor into the admissions process? But it's really rare. Where on the other hand, graduate school admissions can shift around a bit more quickly. So, okay, if you are at this stage in the process, it's likely that you applied to college while you were a senior in high school, and that the majority, if not the overwhelming majority of your friends who were also going to college also were applying to college as high school seniors, because that is the traditional path. The thing with graduate school, of which law school is a subset, is there really isn't that traditional path. And it's, you know, like when I worked in undergrad admissions, if I saw someone take 2 years before applying to undergrad, that was atypical. Here, there is no typical in law school admissions. And that's simultaneously liberating, and yet it also doesn't provide you with any direction. So as you build your timeline, there are two ways to approach it. One is, I'm going to wait until I get all my ducks in a row, and then like an LSAT score I'm happy with, I can foresee me being done with this present job, and it's time for me to go to law school, and all the pieces are lining up. I'm going to work on my applications in this admission cycle. There's the other side, which is I'm targeting this admission cycle, and now I'm going to start getting my ducks in a row. And that usually works out, but it may not. And the classic may not of that is the LSAT, because you are ramping up for the September LSAT, and you also signed up for October as a backup. And things just happened regarding performance on test day. And now you're taking the January exam, or you're registered for the January exam. And now you're hearing that may be late in the process. So at this juncture, you do have the choice. You can submit applications still. It is later, you know, than I would suggest, but you can submit your applications. There are going to be plenty of people who apply in January, February, who will gain admission to lots of really good law schools. Okay. On the other hand, some people would rather just take the time, especially if they had some qualms with the LSAT this fall. It may be better for them to just wait until April to take it, or to wait until June to take it, and then ramp up to their applications in September and in October. And that's really subjective. An additional factor there also being, what are you presently doing, and are you happy to do it for another admission cycle, right? Some people are in those positions where they would prefer not to work for the next year, but if they have to, they can do it. On the other hand, there are people for whom they just can't do what they're doing anymore. It's time to go to law school. So I acknowledge sometimes when people hear like, you actually have the choice. You don't have to apply this year if you don't want to. If it's not right for you, you can apply next year. That does seem to throw them for a bit of a loop in this process. Also, maybe because they do have that deadline in their head too from the previous process. Like, oh yeah, I apply by the deadline, I'm good to go. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, personally, for myself, I love canceling plans. I love not doing something that I was planning on doing. I love to push it out another year. And so I was happy to be like, yeah, I'm just going to take more years until that's like, until I have a clean shot, basically. I don't want anything messing with me. I want it to be the best that I can do. want to bring the best thing I can to the table. Basically, we always tell people, apply when your application is at its strongest. My application happened to be at its strongest 3 years after I graduated. I don't think I can get it any better. And that is not the case for every student, but I think to the extent that that's feasible for a student, it is something that we've talked about and that we kind of recommend as a thing to keep in mind, I suppose.
On that note, so Clayton, I really appreciate you being here. I appreciate you asking those questions, flipping the normal podcast around where I'm more the guest, you're more the host, since you're outlining like what are those things that have made you stop and say like, whoa, wait a second. And for our audience, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Whether you're watching us, whether you're tuning in on our more traditional podcast formats like Spotify, Apple, and Amazon. And for all of you, until next time, we wish you all the best on your law school applications.
Happy holidays.